Hey, you here? Oh, look. Let's not get too exact on the details. You are here. You know it. We know it. You're listening to the Paul Leslie Hour. And this is your pronouncer speaking. Not Paul, your pronouncer. On this episode, we're proud to present Paul's original interview with the very accomplished pianist Chris Walters. Now, this originally went out on radio in January 2008. A lot has happened since then, but Chris Walters has been going at it. People asked Paul, quite a lot actually, what have you been listening to, huh? Someone said he never stops listening to Chris Walters. Why? Walters is a wonderful songwriter and performer. With just the right whimsy and personality, he's worked with artists like Alabama, Barbara Mandrell, J.D. Souther, and also with our friends Roger Guth and Peter Mayer. Now, many of you may have witnessed Chris Walters' piano mastery on Peter Mayer's Stars and Promises Christmas Tour. Well, guess what? Chris will be on this 2023 Stars and Promises Christmas shows. Paul can't wait to see this year's show. Why, he may make it to the Raleigh, North Carolina show, but Peter Mayer and friends will be performing everywhere from Stone Mountain, Georgia, St. Louis, Missouri, Cambridge, Massachusetts, so try to go and say hello to Chris Walters for us. Tell him the Paul Leslie Hour sent you. Real quick, wherever you're tuning in, whatever you're listening to, you can easily subscribe to Paul Leslie's YouTube channel. It's free, it's fun, it connects you with content just like this. Please sign in, ring that bell, and we thank you. With that, I see no reason we shouldn't hear from Chris Walters now. And don't forget, Stars and Promises. Yay! Enjoy the interview.
I would like to welcome the artist I've been listening to the most lately in my spare time, pianist and songwriter, Mr. Chris Walters.
Thanks for having me on your show, Paul.
My pleasure. You were born in New Orleans. I was wondering if your parents were musicians or how you got the music bug.
My dad played some concertina or squeeze box, and my mom played a little bit of piano. But actually, when I was 7, I saw someone. It might have been Van Cliburn, it might have been Liberace, someone, a long-haired musician, on television, and swore that I could do that. They were playing some, gargantuan piano piece on a gargantuan piano, and it was with all these flourishes, and I just remember looking at the screen thinking that I could do that. And so I asked my mom for a piano and piano lessons, and she bought an old rundown upright. I was just shocked when I sat down to play and realized that I had no real ability or knowledge of the instrument at all. So that's pretty much how I started, and I think the rest of my life has been spent trying to make up for the fact that I was living, that I thought I could play and I really couldn't. So I've spent since then trying to get to the level that I thought I could play initially.
Who are your influences on the piano?
They're really too numerous to mention, but I would say just a rough group of them would be George Gershwin, Bebo Valdez, Chick Corea, Bud Powell, Thelonious Monk, Vladimir Horowitz. Oh, that's just a sprinkling of names I can throw out there, but really I can't think of anyone who hasn't influenced me in some way or another.
One of the artists that I really like is Jelly Roll Morton, and one of your songs on your album, Cool Blue Swing, the Stroll with Jelly Roll song. I was wondering if you could tell us about what influenced you to write that song.
I got into Jelly Roll's music about 10 years ago, and then I read two biographies of him, one called Dead Man's Blues, which was kind of a story of him going to the West Coast, and then the other better biography of him that I really enjoyed by Alan Lomax, the curator at the Smithsonian Institution, who actually recorded all the last interviews with Jelly Roll at the end of his life. Library of Congress, I guess, recordings is what they are, and they're available on disc, and they're worth every cent, if not more, of what they cost, just to hear a great master talk and play on these recordings. You probably heard them, being a fan of Jelly Rolls. But anyway, Alan Lomax wrote a book entitled Mr. Jelly Lord, which is a Jelly Roll song. I read these biographies, and they got into some of the seedier and more colorful aspects of Jelly Roll's life, and I was just fascinated by those, and I just wrote a swing tune, which obviously is kind of a more progressive jazz tune. The song that I wrote is not really in the spirit of his music, Jelly Roll's music, as much as it's just, as it's called, a droll stroll with Jelly Roll. It's kind of a contemporary swinging look at the more colorful aspects of Jelly Roll Morton's life. So what got me into it initially is reading those biographies and listening to him play on these recordings and just being in awe.
You've worked with a lot of artists. For example, you worked with Alabama. A lot of our listeners are probably familiar with you with the work that you've done with Peter Mayer. I was wondering about the artist that you're particularly proud of having worked with.
I'm extremely proud of anyone I've worked with. I've kind of gleaned and learned things from everyone that I've played with. That's been fortunate. I worked with Barbara Mandrell's music director, and that's why I moved to Nashville from New York in 1989. And I learned a lot in that position with her band. And then I moved on to Alabama. It was a completely different type of band and type of show. And you might think they're both country artists, so it's very similar, but actually the music and the vibe and the audience were completely different for both of those artists. I would say the music that's closest to my heart of people that I've worked with would be Pete Mayer, Jeff Coffin, and Bela Fleck. I think being brought up in a jazz environment, first of all three of those artists are either jazz artists or extremely well-versed in jazz. The avenues that I take as a performer and as a player fit and are closer to my heart with those artists.
Well, how did you meet Peter Mayer?
I met him when I was attending college at Washington University in St. Louis in the early 80s. And he was also, I believe, attending, but he was an adjunct faculty member as well. He and his brother Jim were teaching there, and they had a group, Left Lane, in the early 70s, and then it switched into PM in the 80s. So they were kind of heroes of ours growing up in St. Louis, and also teachers as well as just friends and great musicians. So that's kind of how I met, just hanging in the same circles and going to the school that he was at.
The title track of your recent album, Cool Blue Swing, that's a really great song. I really love that song, and you wrote that with Peter. So I was wondering if you could tell us what inspired the song Cool Blue Swing.
I run. I try to clears my mind to go running. So one time on a jog that I was taking, I think I saw a kid watching some other kids playing on a swing, and the core concept of the idea of the melancholy and the memory of looking back, the nostalgia of looking back at childhood, like that initially inspired the song. And then, believe it or not, there was a song called Mambo No. 5, I think, that was out around the time I was coming up with this concept. That song, it had this humorous, lilting beat to it that was just infectious and really funny. And I started creating these lyrics to Cool Blue Swing around the vibe of that song. I don't even remember who the artist was who did Mambo No. 5. It seems kind of silly looking back on it at this perspective. But at that time, I do remember just really coming up with the feel of Cool Blue Swing from listening to that track. And then I pretty much wrote all the lyrics, all the verses, and I was really happy with it, but I had no chorus. I thought I'd finish it, though, because I didn't want to force a chorus into it. I came up with some chorus ideas, and nothing felt right. Pete Mayer came over to my house to write, and I asked him to listen to this song, Cool Blue Swing, that I'd recently felt I'd finished writing, and he listened to it, and he loved it, and and I said, I don't have a chorus, though, and I feel just out of respect for the tradition of songwriting, it needs a chorus, but every time I try to force a chorus on it, it doesn't work, and it just doesn't feel forced. And I gave him some of my chorus ideas, and they were really specific. And he just, in his magical way, just with his guitar in hand, just saying, well, why does it have to be so specific to what you're saying in the verses? Why don't you just say something like, dizzy when you're up, dizzy when you're down, something about the swing of life, And he made it this more all-encompassing lyric. And I took those ideas that he had for the chorus, which were just beautiful, and kind of rewrote the song around his idea of a chorus for it.
I think it's very interesting. What about some of the other songs in the album? Is there one that is a favorite of yours?
I don't know if there's a favorite. I've always been really partial to Cool Blue Swing is one. I hope I share your enthusiasm for that, and I really appreciate your enthusiasm for that, because for some reason that one touched by it still, just by the flow of it and the feel of it, I guess, and the nostalgia involved with it, and also by the fact that other artists Obviously, Peter Mayer recorded it, but I've had several people interested in recording that one. So that one's close to my heart. The ballad In Love With You is one that the initial core germ of the tune came really quickly, but I probably wrote 100 verses to that until I found the verses that I really liked. So that one took a long time to write. It's then performed at weddings, which is kind of cool. So that one I really feel is pretty special. And then I wrote the last song on the album, Your Carousel, for my wife for our 4th wedding anniversary, which was quite a while ago. We now just celebrated our 18th. So that's a relatively old song, but people seem to be drawn to that lyric and the flow of that tune as well. So I guess those 3 are the most special to me off that album.
Jumping to another artist that you've written songs with, you wrote a song with Roger Guth on his cowboy ballet album called Men Eat Butterflies, and that was a co-write.
Yeah.
Hoping you could tell us about that song.
Roger obviously is such a great songwriter, and some of the more outlandish and beautiful things that Pete has written have been either influenced by Roger or directly taken from a germ of an idea that Roger came up with. Obviously, Pete would say the same thing. Roger's just a real special musician and songwriter. I don't remember much about that song. Man, I haven't heard it in so long. I don't have a perspective on it right now. I do know that lyrically, I think most of the lyrics are Roger's. I think what I came up with was, if I recall, more of the flow of the music, or I was more involved in the flow of the music than I was in the lyric. I don't know that I came up with much of the music either. I don't remember how much of that I was involved with, but I do remember being fascinated because its own way, it's a very obtuse lyric, but hooky as well, which is one of Roger's. That's his M.O., obtuse but hooky.
Well, as you were saying, Roger Guth is an amazing songwriter. But other than just the fact that he's a wonderful musician, what is Roger Guth like?
He's very funny, very dry sense of humor, real quick. He's got a very quick mind. At times so quick that I take a few moments to catch up with him. But his wit is very dry, and really, he's a very informed person. I think he gleans a lot from different things in life. He's not centered on one specific thing. When he's looking at a subject or talking about something, it seems like he's coming from a bunch of different sides at once, which is really interesting to me.
Other than your album, Cool Blue Swing, you also have a 3-disc set of hymns that's under the Grand Vista. All of our listeners can check that out, grandvista.com. So I was hoping you could tell us about this collection of Christian hymns.
This is a company that started about a year and a half ago. It was started by a guy named David Maestrin, who is a songwriter. I was just doing some initial sessions for some of his tunes, and I was arranging some of his tunes for the band in the studio, and he liked the way I did one of his ballads, and he said, you should approach some hymns this way. Why don't we record some hymns with you arranging them with this kind of aesthetic in mind, I guess. And I said, sure, whatever, as long as he's paying for it, that's fine. So it kind of grew out of that. He came to me with this idea of he'd like me to arrange these hymns, all the standard hymns, Christian hymns. I knew these songs inside and out going into them, which is always helpful, but I wanted to bring something new, and I kind of feel like I approached it initially like the Vince Guaraldi Trio. Many of your listeners might be familiar with the stuff he did for the Charlie Brown animated series, like Charlie Brown Christmas and so forth, the Peanuts characters. Vince Guaraldi was a brilliant pianist during the 50s and 60s and early 70s. I don't know anyone who doesn't enjoy his approach to jazz and to tunes in general. And so I felt like going in, that was the sort of approach, was to go with this jazz trio, these jazz trio arrangements of hymns. But what turned out with that soon turned into full orchestrated excursions, orchestrated around my jazz trio arrangements. I guess that's the best way to describe it. We actually recorded about 50 hymns. I think 36 have made it onto the albums. But we spent quite a large chunk of time getting these things recorded, and I'm really proud of it.
When you're not performing music or recording music, what do you like to do?
I am actually an animator, computer animation. I've gotten into some 3D. In fact, I'm working on a 3D animation of my song, Cool Blue Swing. but I initially got into it in traditional 2D cell animation, and I've got an animation from my Cool Blue Swing album, actually, the song The Cutting Edge. I animated that, and that animation won at the Key West Indie Fest 2005 for Best Animated Short or whatever. So I do that, which is obviously a real time-consuming thing, and I spend time with my family. I like to read a lot, and I play soccer. I play soccer for a rec team here, an over 40 rec team here in Nashville. My daughter's the real soccer player, though. I just try to be a pretty boring person, really.
The answers I get for this question is always interesting. I'm dead serious. I'd like to know, what is your all-time favorite meal?
My all-time favorite meal? I would have to be my wife's gumbo.
Wow, that does sound good right now, some gumbo.
Gumbo sounds good. It's a rainy day here in Nashville. I don't know what it's like there in Atlanta, but in Nashville it's rainy and gumbo would be perfect.
This last question, this program is going to be going out all over the world. So my last question is, what would you, Mr. Chris Walters, like to say to the world?
Peace. In one word, peace.
Well spoken. Thanks so much for joining us here. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you perform again.
Thank you, Paul. I appreciate it.
We thank you and appreciate you dropping in for the Paul Leslie Hour today. You know, you can help the Paul Leslie Hour in our mission to provide independent media content like this by visiting www.thepaulleslie.com/support. We truly thank you. This is your announcer speaking. Performance of The Entertainer intro song and Corina Corina outro song, courtesy of John Primorano. Well, that's it for today. So until next time, be safe and be good.